Hi everyone. Yeah, thanks for having me. So look, today I'm going to be talking about open socio-technical systems. You know, it's so complex I have to look at the slide when I see it, even though there's one there. What I'll do is I'll start off with just a couple of little problem kind of statements. Then we're going to go kind of a bit into a bit socio-technical, a bit of theory about systems thinking. And then I'm going to talk about an example of a company who, for me, are the most groundbreaking organisation in the world when it comes to organisational design and autonomous teams. So if you've seen me talk before, you know I love to bang on about this. So let's get on with it. So I'll just wait for the first slide. We do have a bit of a problem in the world of work, all right? So I just want to kind of say that what inspires me to kind of turn up and keep advocating for people and teams is that I value people, and I think that the world of work doesn't value them, their talents and skills as much as they could do. And that's because of organisational factors, hierarchy, and bureaucracy. These ones, I think these are for Australia. Like nearly 50% of people are stressed at work. It's not very, very good. And, you know, quiet quitters, almost 70%. I think that's very high, but even the recent Gallup surveys, year after year, it's the same. You know, we've got basically 70% of people are kind of disengaged at work. So there's a real problem in the world of work. Now, I'm going to bash agile coaches as a reforming agile coach. I've been looking very much into teams and the theories of teams and great examples of team-based organisations all over the world, different countries, different contexts. And so what does the theory say about teams? A lot of the stuff that we know about teams kind of derives from Kurt Lewin and his, you know, the father of organisational psychology, his work going on through Beyond and all that. But there's not as much as you'd think for something that's so important. Probably the most recent stuff that's interesting that's published, not Project Aristotle from Google and their psychological safety stuff, was Hackman's work. Now, could anyone take a guess of how much, as a percentage of the variance in team success, management coaching would add? 5? 50? 10? Right, you'll just get on with it, right? Don't worry about that. It's 60% of it's team design. And that's why I wanted to be here today, because if I think about the life as an agile coach, the futility of going into a system that's badly designed, that has conflicting responsibilities, priorities, offers politics, to find out that only 10% of the effectiveness of the team can be directly attributed to coaching. It's kind of dispiriting. Like, why would you do that job? You are destined to fail. And, you know, the coaches, they do good work. Many of them do good work. But if you don't understand the bigger picture, you're really setting yourself up for a big problem. So in Hackman's, I mean, it's not a talk unless you put Edwards Deming up. Don't worry, Conway will be next. But the Hackman, they reckon it's 80% of the team's problems are outside the team. So if I'm an agile coach and I run a retrospective, I mean, like, once we knock off the easy ones, like, what's the point? You know, and that's why developers that I've worked with eventually hate retrospectives, because you can't change the system from inside the team. To the point, and a true story, I did run a retro once where the team turned up and they gave me one card and it said, no more effing retros. So I get it. Well, Edward Stenning said it was 5% of the outcome is based on the system. Now, I'm not going to go over Conway's law. I'm guessing everyone in this room is all across this, right? So I'm just going to do this because it leads me to the point where I'm going to talk about socio-technical. So obviously, Conway's law, inverse Conway maneuver, British spelling. I see Luke at the back of the room, and there'll be a workshop later. So come along, see Donna. But I kind of got into socio-technical stuff, and I saw something happening in parallel in the world of architecture, and that was that people started talking about socio-technical, yeah? And socio-technical has a very specific meaning, yeah? And so when I saw Team Topology stuff, which, you know, I'd been on from the start, and we talked a lot about it, and with the guys at Team Topologies, I started to see architects talking about socio-technical. And that kind of lit me up, because I'll tell the story of how I got into it, but there's a very specific meaning about socio-technical, and I feel that in the architectural world, it's starting to get bandied about. It's a bit buzzwordy. It's a bit kind of fashionable to talk about it, but socio-technical has a very specific meaning, and that meaning is that it's optimized around humans for delivering value with technology. And I'll unpack it in a bit more detail, because something is either socio-technical or it's not, okay? And the person that told me there is this woman, right? So this is Marilyn Emery. She was the co-founder of Open Systems Theory. She was married to Fred Emery. Fred Emery was described by the AFR, even though he was a communist, as the greatest management thinker that Australia ever had. And so it's a bit of a kind of crazy thing that he's not really well known in Australia. But Marilyn was an academic, and she worked with Fred, and I'll talk about this, but she told me, hey, socio-technical is this and that's good enough for me, right? So she's in her 80s. We went up there to Canberra, where she lives, and we did a masterclass with her about open systems theory. She likes to drink red wine and tell you you're wrong and you don't understand it, and that's very, very rewarding to spend time with her. So that's my Yoda and my authority. Now, Fred's worked with Akoff, he worked with Trist, he worked with so these legends. So they are an absolute source of truth. Yep, and socio-technical as a thing starts with the Tavistock Institute and Eric Trist. He met Kurt Levine when he came over to the UK just after the Second World War, and they took his ideas to heart. And the first paper about socio-technical systems, and I'll have to check my notes, but it's on coal getting on the long wall method, right? So it's like 1951, and we're in the coal mines, and Tristan Bamford wrote a paper. There was a problem that happened. Coal mining used to be done by small teams in groups, in bunches, yeah? And then a new technology came along, which was long wall coal getting. So instead of everyone working their section of the wall, they had one giant wall and a giant machine. And so when they introduced this into coal mines, they thought, well, productivity is going to go through the roof, yeah? Of course, we've got these wonderful machines, it could process all this stuff. It didn't. Accidents started to go up, people didn't come to work, there were physically fights in the shift's handover, and production didn't really rise. And they were, so what's behind this? You know, if you've got a superior technology, why aren't we seeing the benefits? And so this was the invitation for Trist and Banforth. And Banforth was previously a coal miner before he became an academic, to look into it. And they started talking about socio-technical systems. And that is optimizing for people with technology for a superior outcome. Now, what it meant for the world of coal was that in these villages who ran the mines, they were very tight groups. Like coal mining's like they do it with a family and their cousins, and so they were very tight. And what would happen with this is people were split up, right? You only do this job, you only do this job, you only do this job. And no one had responsibility or review for the whole thing. Yeah, so people lost sight of the whole thing. So they kind of came in and they started running experiments. And the experiments were around autonomous teams who have a full view of the process working together to an outcome. What happened before was people just did their job and they left. But then the next shift came in, they had to tidy up at the start of the shift. So the people didn't leave it clean. And then, you know, if it was your problem, it wasn't my problem. And so by giving people responsibility for the whole thing and asking them to join the teams and having agreements with each other, optimizing for the social connection and autonomy of the group, production recovered and excelled. And so that's the birth of it. So that's socio-technical systems. It became a really big thing. And I think, like, I'll go through the design principle first of the meta principle, and then we'll talk about how that evolved into open systems theory and what the difference is and why it's important. So if you take away one thing today, this picture, and I'll explain it, is the thing, right? So these are the fundamental organizational design principles that underpin open systems theory and socio-technical thinking. Yep. And they are, basically there are two principles and one absence of principle. Yep. So on the first is design principle 1, which is a hierarchy. Yep. And that hierarchy has a manager. Yeah. And that manager is telling the team what to do. And so you might get this, I don't know, you work on a project, you're the BA, you're the coder, you're the tester, that's it, that's your job. And when you finish, you roll off. Yeah, you're not in the team, you're just an individual delivering your skill. Yeah? And the problem for people is it's not a great experience when you're in a team and you're just the cog. Yeah? You are a replaceable part in the machine. And the person who knows what's going on isn't you, it's the manager. Yeah? The manager who sits above you. Only they have the whole picture. Only they know the resource, and often they might know the actual big goal that you weren't privy to. Yeah? And so you're a replaceable part in the machine. And it's just not great. It's not a great experience because you're not in a team. You're not working together to a common outcome, and that is the definition of a team. The second one is design principle 2. Yep, and that is an autonomous work group. Autonomous work groups see the whole picture and they work together to achieve it, and they coordinate themselves between each other. And that's a much more enjoyable way to go. Now, the thing about design principle 1 is that you've got a redundancy of parts. You are a part of the machine that can be replaced. Don't like him, replace him. Design principle 2, you have redundancy of function, yeah? Because people are more than just one skill. You know, you may be an engineer, you can test, you can write, you can be a DBA, you can be a part-time product manager, right? So people are skilled, and we have a meta skill, which is that we can learn. We can learn new skills. And so when you have a redundancy of function, maybe not every skill that the team has is required at that time, but people have other skills too. And the importance is the cohesion of the group and how it works. But these groups set their own goals and they manage themselves. That's not to say there isn't any hierarchy in the organization. I think there is, but there's a hierarchy of function. Yeah? And that's different. It's not a hierarchy of personal dominance like in an authoritarian or hierarchical organization or one of personal dominance. And that is that someone needs to maybe see a longer term strategy. Someone needs to decide what the shape of the organization is to respond to that. Some people may have a view that's 18 months, 2 years out and has to do the work for you to pave that road so you can get there. And someone has to be responsible for the system of teams as well. You know, shared services, team health, what do they need to survive? So we can have, maybe 3 levels but it's not, I tell you what to do. And I think architecture is a good place for that, because architects should be making recommendations to teams. Now, not every recommendation the team wants to do, And when you enforce it, that's you're becoming, the hierarchy of dominance. There is the third one, which is the absence of a principle, which is laissez-faire. Yeah? And laissez-faire is everyone does what they want. And hopefully, if they have a clear goal and they're smart people, they might get it together. Sometimes not. And I do feel that many of the transformation efforts I've seen, certainly in this town, has been kind of an enforced agile transformation in a DP1 way, and then they hire coaches and they say, oh, right, it's laissez-faire coaching time. Off you go into the wild. And unsurprisingly, it just doesn't work. But the goal should have been the autonomous teams. And teams are rarely autonomous in some of these structures. You're free to work on whatever we tell you is in the backlog, So those are the fundamental principles that underpin it. Now, Marilyn has very strong views about this. Levine kind of said, well, it's situational. What is the best way of working? You know, if you're out there hunting wildebeest on the plains, you might want a directive culture. If you're back in the village afterwards, you might want a democratic one. So you can kind of shift, but she's of the firm belief that for people to have rewarding lives and work lives, that this is the most important one. And also that mixing the modes doesn't work, yeah? So what happens in an organization, and I've seen this, you get those little bubbles of awesomeness, brilliance. An enlightened manager says, I'll protect you, let's go, on you go. And you go, that's great. And then that manager gets promoted and your bubble deflates. And so what tends to happen in organizations is the hierarchy reasserts itself over time, and that autonomy is stripped away because it's only as powerful as the person who's protecting that bubble. So that's the fundamental design principle. So when you think of organizations, how are you enabling autonomous teams? So this is Fred. Fred was the guy who worked with Trist in the Socio-Technical stuff. Now, they did some amazing work. The whole of Norway did a systems, socio-technical systems approach. They took the major industries throughout the 60s, about 61 to 69, and they reoriented. There was a craze in Norway, can you believe this, for participative democracy, which is kind of the opposite now. It's a bit of a craze for autocracy, but you know. So like they would be experimenting in scale, but Fred saw some problems with how they had implemented this model. And so so Fred's problems were about how it was implemented and how people participated. So I'll share just a slide about what open systems theory is, and then we can talk the differences. So this is a terrible slide. This is the original material, so don't blame me for it, and don't bother looking at it too much. I could talk you through it if it didn't. But the idea of open systems is that organizations don't exist in a vacuum. They are in an environment, and they interact with that environment. And so they need to adapt as the environment adapts. So there needs to be organizational ability to see what's happening and respond. And the organization needs to be able to organize itself around the changing environment to produce the outcomes that it would like. And that was a big insight. And the people who should organize are the people who do the work, because they understand the context. And when they have the context and they understand the environment and the goals, then they can deliver on it. And so his thing was the search conference. So the first step was you get together, you go, what's happening in the world? Yeah. What's the most desirable world? What's the most likely to happen? And then you go through some steps and you kind of basically, you come up with a list and you say, understanding the world around us, these are the things that we'd like to do. Yeah. Now, open strategy isn't a new thing now, but it never seems to go anywhere. And there's a real reason for that. It doesn't go anywhere because the organization doesn't change. Yeah, you get a list of things, but how the organization works doesn't change. It doesn't respond to how you deliver the goal. And the next step in it is the participative design workshop. And that is where you'd ask the organization to divide itself in order to deliver the goal. So you're reorganizing around a clear list of objectives. So you're reteaming and responding to the changing environment. And that's really important. Responding to the environment, so you don't go, oh, I was making shoes and now China's making shoes and I'm out of luck, I'm out of business, And then the second thing is that the people who are doing the work bring their knowledge into the system of work in the redesign. And so the criteria for redesigning, and this is probably a nice one for the groups, and these are the criteria that we use in OST for work groups that we're looking to kind of have at the right levels, is autonomy. It's number one. Now, you can't have too much autonomy, you have to kind of work in the benefits of everyone. Learning, you could have too much learning, so there's a sweet spot. Are you learning enough to keep stimulated, to keep interest, to keep growing? Variety. Yeah, like you're doing the same thing every day. Not good, but you're doing something different every day. It could be a bit taxing. The next three are maximal. Support and respect. You can't have too much respect. Well, probably not. Meaningfulness, obviously. And a desirable future, which is why we called our company Desirable Future. So, Desirable Future, like, do I see myself working in this company in 5 years' time? Do I want to be here? Is this something I want to be part of? Yep. So when we're doing a participative redesign, these are the criteria that I would say, well, should be top of mind. And there's some cool workshops and all that we can do as part of that. The difference between socio-technical systems and open systems is the environment, right? It's adapting to the environment. It's looking at the whole system, and it's participative. So the problem was, and this happened in Norway when they did the democracy project, the experts go away and they redesign your process, and they come back to people and they say, there you go, there's your new organisation. And I know this happens. I heard people last night at dinner, they were like, oh, the experts come back and they tell us this. Well, great for the experts, but they're not doing it. Right? So that's the major difference. Why is it important for architectures, right? I'm here talking to architects because I want to draw you out, from talking about technical and the system and to expand to socio-technical. But why stop there, If Conway's law is true and the inverse Conway maneuver is legitimate, then you are in a socio-technical space when you're designing. So you need to be optimizing designs for productive work groups, assuming people are doing the work. And so it's important for architects to understand the social as well as the technical in order to be effective. That also means that they understand the environment. What is happening around, because it doesn't exist in the bubble, and it's not just technical practice that evolves outside of the organisation. Societal trends change as well. Are you working from home or are you not? What does that mean? So there's a call to say, as architecture practice goes, to expand. You guys should be doing organisational design. It's not just technical design. It's an important part of the puzzle. Now I'm going to get onto my hobby horse, hire. So who knows about hire here? Cool, quite a few. That's good. I'm doing my job. So for those who don't know, hire is the world's #1 white goods company. Yeah, they're smashing. There are 100,000 people. They have year-on-year 20% growth. They own Fisher & Paykel. They own GE Appliances, Candy, lots of brand names that you recognise. But Hire is an amazing, amazing company. Hire doesn't really have any managers as such. Hire consists of 3,000 autonomous teams of about 10 to 12 people. Now, a bit of variance depending where you are, but they make fridges and IoT software and washing machines and gaming laptops and they make like manufacturing, not IT, with autonomous teams. How do they do it? It's crazy, right? So when you work at Hire, teams have 3 decision rights. They decide what they do. No one tells a team at Hire what to do. They decide who works in their team, to the point where if the leader isn't cutting it, the team can vote them off. And finally, they decide on how resources are allocated. And this is really important. They decide how much they get paid. Yeah? So they're not waiting for finance to send, you've been allocated this in the budget this year. How do they do that? Well, they're paid by the customer. There's no central allocation of funds in Hire. Yeah? So your team needs to be delivering value to a customer who's willing to pay. Now, it's not everyone. It has to be a network, right? Because you're only going to have, a few hundred customer-facing teams. Now, they call them micro-enterprises, right? So you're going to have a few, like hundreds. There's going to be a network of people behind them supporting them. But you only get paid when a customer buys the fridge. Yeah? They use blockchain contracts. So when someone buys a fridge, it goes to the next one, it goes to the next one, it goes to the next one. And the teams are paid by the customer. And can you imagine what that means for strategy, right? I'm not going to do anything a customer's not going to pay for. If your team is struggling and I'm reliant on you. I'm going to have to help you, right? Because I'm not getting paid if you're not selling these things. Or maybe I want to start my own enterprise. I see a gap in the market, and I go, you know what? We should be in here. I'm going to get some seed funding, like a startup, and they've got like a 50% internal startup success rate compared to what, 9% is it in the industry standard? So business units will fold if they're not selling, yeah? But this means you're not at the kind of whims of an executive who's like, well, the guy at the barbecue said we should be doing AI, you know, right? Well, that's great. The guy in the barbecue can set up an AI micro-enterprise and come into our ecosystem and do something about it. We're focusing on delivering customer value. And the guy who set up like the 3-door fridge division is a very rich man. You don't need to leave hire. You know, like I've worked at companies where you've had a good idea, you get punished for it. You know, it's like, oh, you're really being awkward. That's not on the roadmap. You know, like, well, it was a good idea, thanks. And the final thing is that they're in an ecosystem of network teams. So the latest thing they're talking about at Hire in the latest iteration of their model, which is called Rendan is that it's a boundaryless organization. It's a win-win agreement, right? So Rendan means to generate reciprocal value between you and a customer, yeah? So it's not one way, it's not generating value just for the customer, you are getting value from the customer too. It's a win-win agreement. It's very important in Chinese culture to have win-win scenarios. But for them, they don't conceive of a boundary. If you want to partner with an external company and do your micro-enterprise, that's fine. They do not care. Hire's last mile delivery service in China delivers more fridges for other companies than their own. Their delivery service is open, you know, and people can just say, oh, right, I'm out there in the mountains, I've got 2 bamboo poles, I'm going to start a delivery business. And you can join the Hire ecosystem. You can become a micro-enterprise. So this is the radical different model that I'm sharing, and it meets all the criteria that I have for teams. Teams are empowered, they have autonomy, they make their own decisions, but it works. This isn't theory, this is reality. This is a real company, it's there. And they're not the only company that work like this, but they're probably the most extreme example. I could talk later about some of the other ones. So I'll kind of just speed up a bit. For me, what does good look like? Well, networks of autonomous teams, you know, microservices you could talk about all day. I think there's a lot of interesting comparisons there. Aligned around mutual value. Value for me, value for you, yeah? So would I pay for your testing function or would I do it in-house? Well, I can make the decision. I'll decide whether you're adding value or not, you know? So no one's foisted on anything. Autonomy and accountability is probably the biggest one, yeah? So there's some secrets about how this works at scale. Accountability is a big one, yeah? And so whether it's Burzug or Hire or Semco, they can see what's happening, right? Those metrics are available, and so they're not being interfered, but if your revenue's going down, they're going to ask you what's going on, yeah? So there has to be some sort of accountability for performance, but, you know, you get the autonomy to make your decisions. And the final is that it's adaptive and participative. And I think that's the thing that gets overlooked. It's responding to the changing environment, but the people, you're setting the challenge to people to say, the environment's changing, how are we going to align around delivering value? Yeah? And so people can start a micro-enterprise by themselves. They can see an opportunity. And so Zhang Ruimin, the chairman of Hire, kind of says, well, it's like a rainforest. Some parts will die, other parts will grow in its place. But we're not mandating it. It's happening as a system. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure they really know the mysteries of how it works. It just works. So it's a very interesting beast. I was just going to talk about participatory organisational design. I also do some stuff with Semco. The first thing, always important, and this is why I like doing all these talks, is just the awareness that it's possible. Yeah, and so if you wanted to do something like this, you have to get the managers who have the power. They have the power. It won't get work bottom up. Yeah, you have to work with them to understand what does it mean to manage in a system like this, because there's lots of work that still needs to be done for managers in a lot of cases. And then it's participatory organisational design. And this is where I see things like team topologies, event storming, domain-driven design as playing an important role. So it's only part of the puzzle, but it's an important part because I don't know of any other better ways for people to organise. And then it's test it, you know? Now, this is first 3 steps, there's like 15, right? But just to get you started. And so kind of to wrap up, it's about participative team design, awesome design, decision rights. Yeah, so I don't know how many people go, oh, we're being told that we haven't delivered and it's really sad and the manager's angry. And I go, did you prioritise the backlog? No. So you didn't decide what to do and now you're being held accountable. Okay. And the final is accountability. So what is the value that you generate? You have to be able to show it. You have to be able to show it because if you can show the value, then people will trust you to get on and do the right thing. That's it on time for questions. Yeah, good 10 minutes. This is me and Ali, Dad and Dave. These are my colleagues at Desirable Futures. So this is what we do. Like we're into this. We are the Hire Model Institute Research Centre for Australia and New Zealand. So if you want to talk about hire, come talk to us. We also work with the Buurtzorg, so we ran some training with them 2 weeks ago, so we can talk about that, and we're doing some stuff with Simcoe Style Institute. So if you're into self-managing organisations, if you want to know how it works at scale, definitely give us a chat.